Yep. So we'll start again. Um, so the first point for me is that mindset is key. So we each have two mindsets. There's the idea of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, and we all have both. So with the fixed mindset, that's very typical of like negative self-talk. So that's when you try and do something and you fail, and then you talk to yourself in your mind and you tell yourself like, "Oh, I suck. I'm terrible. I'm never succeed. I'm never gonna make it." And you sort of talk yourself down, right? And that's a very negative mindset that doesn't really serve you, if you want to improve, if you want to get better, if you want to grow. But we also have, the growth mindset, and that's a mindset that views failure as an opportunity to improve, right? And everyone has these two mindsets. Some people have more of the fix, some people have more of the growth, but many people, they're not actually conscious of this as well. So, people, they talk to themselves all the time, but it's all subconscious. They're not actually conscious of what they're saying. So the first step is that we want to nurture a growth mindset and we want to actually suppress the fixed mindset. And the first way to do that is just to recognize that we are all imperfect beings, right? We're all allowed to make errors. We're all allowed to make mistakes because we're all imperfect. And the idea is that we want to become conscious of our own mental self-talk, right? And we want to catch ourselves if we start to get into that negative mindset. So if we do an audit and we miss the finding, and then we see that, oh, this other people found it, and then we can start to say, oh, I should have found that one. I'm terrible. I suck. That person's so much better than me. But we can catch that. We can catch that negative self-talk, and we can consciously reframe it into a positive growth mindset, right? So we can reframe that and say, actually, hey, this is an opportunity for me to learn. I need to learn, how that person found that vulnerability. What questions did they ask? What knowledge did they have that I didn't have? And then I could find it in the future, right? And if you want to
Really
know more
nice.
about this, there's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's a very valuable book. It's cheap to buy, but very valuable, the information that's within. And the earlier in life that you read this book and start to become conscious of what's going on here, the better your life will be, the more
Yes.
successful you'll be throughout your life.
Dacian, just one thing. I mean, that's perfect. Just can you put the mindset slides on the screen because we're still seeing the home slide. Yes, this one.
Right.
Yes, okay.
This one.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just leave it in this setting here, and then
I don't
we'll
know
just go through
why.
this.
I don't know why. Are you changing the slides as you talk?
I
What?
tried, I tried, but it looks like if I'm in the full screen presentation mode, it looks like they don't want to change. When I change them, they're not changing for you.
Yeah. So
So
just just leave it at the
yeah,
screen. Thank you so much, brother.
yeah,
Keep on. That was an
right,
amazing, amazing start, by the way.
right. And so, one of the problems with getting into smart contract auditing is the question where to start, right? Because there's so many things to learn. There's a huge field of knowledge that you have to acquire to be successful in this area. And there's so many building blocks that you need to know, to put them all together to start getting quality findings. And when you're getting started, it can actually be just overwhelming. You can look at this whole field of knowledge and you can just feel completely overwhelmed, like it's way beyond your ability to do it. But again, that's kind of the fixed mindset where you're limiting yourself. You can reframe that. You can adopt a growth mindset and you can say, well, look, all these other people did it, right? They're all humans just like me. They're all imperfect beings just like I am. And they all managed to do it. So I can probably do it as well. And so what do? Well, assuming that you've learned Solidity, you've done some CTFs, you've done, Johnny's course or Patrick's YouTube marathon, so where do you start now? Well, here's what I did. This is what worked for me. You can consider it,
Nice.
take it, use it if it works for you, right? So what I do is I choose one topic that I need to improve on, right? So precision loss, slippage, NFTs, ERC20s, lending and borrowing, governance protocols, L2s, automated market makers. I choose one topic, right? That's what I do. Now I use Solidit.xyz. It's a great tool. And I use that, I set the impact to high, and then I just put in the keyword, like slippage or precision, whatever it might be. And then I literally go through all the highs, and then after I do all the highs, I do all the mediums, and I work through every single issue.
Kiki.
And I've had people message me and they say like, oh, Dacian, like, did you really read like every single issue? There's like, 100, 200. Did you really read every single one? And yeah, man, like I did. I read every single issue. Right? If you get hung up on one, and you don't understand it, don't worry. Just set that one aside and come back to it later and keep moving through them.
You read everything, so that's so nice, man. There's a lot of a lot of will of doing this. I have one question for you, like already. which is you said, okay,
Sure.
you have to go and change the imposter syndrome mindset to a winning mindset. But how do we actually change that? I mean, I don't see a easy switch there.
Right, so the first step is to be conscious of it, right? To be conscious of that mental self-talk that we all do to ourselves all the time. And then if you find yourself slipping into that fixed limiting mindset of you're telling yourself, oh, I can't do it, it's too hard, then you literally have to consciously reframe that in your mind. And you can say it verbally out loud. You can say, actually, well, look, all these other people did it, so therefore I can do it as well.
Makes total sense, bro. It's about, when
Yeah.
you
So,
like, you're just like everyone else.
yes. Yeah, you're just like everyone else, but you have to become conscious of it and you have to start to consciously retrain your mind and retrain your thinking.
Really cool stuff.
Right. All right. So now, as you're, so imagine you've picked precision loss, or you've picked slippage, or you've picked whatever class that you need to improve on. So as you're reading through all those vulnerabilities, what your goal is you want to, within that one topic, you want to identify different classes of vulnerabilities that apply to that one topic. Right. So there's many different types of slippage vulnerabilities. There's many different types of precision loss vulnerabilities. There's many different types of vulnerabilities involving NFTs or lending protocols, and you want to try and identify each class and how they manifest, what the code looks like, what red flags are in there that you can catch in future audits. You want to think of the clues in the code that you can draw on to find these same things in the future. And also, you want to find questions that you can ask of the code to show if these vulnerabilities are present in future audits, right? And what you want to do is you want to create a simplified version of each of these class of vulnerabilities in Foundry, and you want to write your own fixed version where you fix the vulnerability, and then write some tests in Foundry for both the vulnerable version and the fixed version, and put in some console output, some print statements there to print the state, and actually see what's really happening. And for me, I actually found this very valuable when I was trying to wrap my mind around precision loss, to really simplify it and to really have a lot of output in there and to work through step by step and see when the precision loss actually happens, and how it's resolved, and how it affects, and so on and so forth. Now, after you've finished all the ones that you can understand, what you want to do is you want to go back to the ones that you didn't understand and then try them again. And you'll be surprised, how much more you understand the second time around. Imagine that you're going through like 150, 200 vulnerabilities on slippage or precision loss, and maybe there's like 50 that you didn't understand, but you understood the first 100, the first 150, right? Well, when you get the second time around, when you go back to those ones you didn't understand, you're gonna have all that knowledge with you that you've just built up, right? And you're gonna find that you're gonna be able to understand a lot more than when you started, right? And by the way, seeing that progress, seeing that you're able to understand more and more complicated things, that's going to actually drive you. It's going to drive you further because you're going to start to see progress. You're going to start to build momentum, and that's going to encourage you to keep going and to do more and more. One of the hardest things can be just to get started. If you go into Solidit and you type in precision and it pops out 150, 200 things, it can feel overwhelming at first. You can feel, oh, I could never go through them. I could never read out 200 vulnerabilities on precision loss. But I did it, and I'm just a normal person just like you.
Awesome,
So
man.
if I can do it, then you can do it too. There's actually nothing stopping you. It's only your limiting beliefs that are stopping you from doing it.
And the one thing that you said there is very true. I mean, the biggest difficulty people have with auditing is not learning the vectors. They get really good at that really fast. The problem is starting. There are people they are so
Yeah,
good, but they are 8 months doing CTFs and so on. You're never gonna get to the place you wanna be like that.
that's right. Yeah. So now that you've done that, imagine that you've gone through, all the precision loss vulnerabilities, all the slippage vulnerabilities. You've understood maybe 70, 80% of them. You've figured out different permutations, different categories of these vulnerabilities. Well, now what you can do to really internalize all that knowledge is you can write it all up in a nice, educational article, a blog post, and post it on the internet, right? And this is great for everyone else in the community because they're all going to benefit from your work. But it's also great for yourself. As teaching something to others, it forces you to internalize the material, the content so much more, right? You always remember things more when it's things that you've had to teach to someone else than whether you just read it yourself. And this is also, by the way, it's great for your personal brand as well. That can be very helpful if later down the track you want to do private audits or work at a firm. It's very helpful to have a strong personal brand as someone who publishes valuable content in the space. Alrighty, so now I've covered sort of how I do research, and now I'm just going to start to cover my approach to doing actual audits. So the first thing that I have when I approach an audit is I have a skeptical mindset. What does that mean? Well, here's something that many people they might not like to hear, but the reality is that we're in a highly experimental industry, and we are trying a lot of new things, and that's great, right? We want to try many different new things, and we want to see what works and what's best, and that will float to the top. But there'll be many things that won't work, and that's perfectly okay. But what that means is that many projects that we audit, they likely won't be around for more than one market cycle, right? So many of the code bases that we're looking at, they might go into production, but they're probably going to go to zero at some point in time. That's just the reality of being in a highly experimental market where things are rapidly changing. The other thing to consider is that many of the projects that we get to audit now, they're VC projects. They're projects that are funded by venture capitalists, right, who've invested a few $1 million. And typically, VCs and founders, they're looking for the exit, right? They're looking to 10x, 20x, 30x, 50x, 100x their money. And how do they do that? By getting to the exit where they dump on retail's head, while they give free token allocations to influencers who shield the project while they all dump it. Basically, that's kind of how it works. That's just the reality. And so the good thing about this though is that developers, they can often be under time pressure, by the VCs and founders to ship the code, right? Because the VCs, they want to get to the exit so they can make their profit, get their capital to reinvest it again. And so one thing that I've noticed, and I have a very strong development background, is that automated testing in smart contracts is usually it's very lacking compared to traditional software engineering, right? So in traditional software engineering, we would write thousands of automated unit tests, testing all sorts of inputs. We would have continuous integration where, if you make a change and you submit that change to the main branch, then it reruns all the thousands of unit tests. And if the change fails any tests, then the change gets rejected. There's a very strong focus on huge automated testing. Whereas in the smart contract world, it's very rare to see that. What you'll often see is that there might even be no testing, or the testing might just test sort of the base case, the case where everything works well. But yeah, if you want to know more about how sort of VCs pump and dump things, there's a book called The Perfect Stock by Brad Kottishwar, and that sort of covers a sort of a real life situation and how sort of the underbelly of this stuff all works.
You have any ideas of
So
on how successful VCs are in actually exiting? If it's like 20% of the time or 50%,
I think that it would depend on the VC, so you'd have
makes
to ask
sense.
them. And but the goal for them is to get to the exit. It's the goal is not necessarily to build the next Uniswap or the next latest and greatest. The goal is to get a 10x, a 20x, a 30x, and get to the next project. That's the goal.
Awesome.
Return on investment. Beautiful. So my second approach to auditing here, it's the growth mindset. So again, we want to view the audit as an opportunity for learning. So especially when you're starting out, you don't want to be so concerned about the money or getting financial rewards. Your main concern should be about acquiring knowledge. How can I improve? What can I learn from this audit, right? And the idea is that if you do acquire the knowledge, the money, the financial rewards will come. Auditing at the top level, it is very financially rewarding. But to get there, you have to acquire the knowledge that you need to perform at that level and the experience. So you should view these audit contests as an opportunity for learning. And when it comes to project selection, again, like if the goal is to make money, then you should choose, the biggest projects with the biggest bounties, right? With huge code bases, because typically they have less participants, so there's less competition, and you know the price pool is much bigger. But if you're like myself, someone who's perhaps at more the beginning of their journey than at the end of their journey, and you're doing this part time, then if you choose a really big project with 10,000 lines of code, you might not be able to dig into that project. So what I would say is just think about how much time you have, and then choose projects where you have a suitable amount of time to go into. And I would say that you should choose projects that reflect what you've studied. I listened to the interview you did yesterday with Delirious, and he says that he chooses projects it's different to what he studied to learn something new. And that might work, that might be a great approach as well. But for me personally, I find that I learn a lot better when I choose a project where I can apply what I've studied. Because the idea, if you want to remember something really good and if you want to get really good at something, you want to study it, right? And then you want to apply that knowledge. So by choosing a project where you've just studied a lot of stuff around that, then now you're going to go and apply what you've just studied. And that's going to help you to really internalize the knowledge and weaponize it, learn how to use it very well. Alrighty. So now, so I've picked my project and I've set aside time to do it. The way that I work is I try and set aside 3 to 4 hour blocks. So typically, for example, if I'm working during the day, then I try to set aside 3 or 4 hours in the evening. Sometimes if I have full days, then what I find works really well for me is if I do 3 to 4 hours in the morning, and then I take a break, have lunch, whatever, and then do another 3 to 4 hours in the afternoon, evening. That works really well for me in terms of keeping me at peak performance, keeping me in the zone where I'm really performing very well and taking everything in. So once I've put it to approach the actual code base, the first thing that I generally do is I try and read a light or a general or an overview of the documentation if it's available. So sometimes in the audit contest in C4 and Sherlock, there'll be in the contest notes, there'll be like a README with some information. Other times there'll be a link to some documentation, but it's not super in depth. It's just more superficial. And I'll read that one. And as I'm reading that one, what I do is I take notes firstly on the actors and the entities in the system, which typically they'll correspond to smart contracts, and then on interactions between them, which typically corresponds to functions. And then I'm watching for where value is stored and how value is flowing through the system. And I'm taking notes on all this as I'm reading it. And this gives me a good base that when I approach the code, I can start to understand the code because I've already got a good base of the entities and the actors and how the flow and the value in the system. So once I've done that, then I start reading the code bottom up, right? And I choose to understand the smaller files first. And especially if there's a token, like if there's an ERC20 or an ERC721 token, an NFT, then I almost always start there. And why do I do that? Because I want to understand the core building blocks first in order to build up a mental model of how the whole system fits together. And as I'm doing that, I use audit tags to comment. So I'm editing their code with audit tags as comments, and I'm specifically asking questions about the code, right? And as I'm doing this, I'm not going to answer the questions straight away. I'm going to come back and answer those questions once I understand more of the system. So and that's, other people have mentioned this as well, that you want to get into the habit of asking questions about the code, challenging the code. Here we've got some examples, and these examples, they're all real examples. So they all come from either live code, where vulnerabilities have been found, or from audits, where vulnerabilities have been found. But I have changed them around a little bit, sometimes to simplify them, other times to obscure the actual source, because it shouldn't be published right now. But anyway, so we've got audit approach. Here we go. So the first thing we want to do is we want to challenge developer assumptions. So sometimes the developer assumptions will actually be in the comments, right? So here we've got this mint function, and the developer has commented here, total supply is 0, assume that shares correspond 1-to-1, right? So what they're doing here is they're assuming that the getShares function will only return 0 if total supply is 0. So we want to get into the mindset of challenging developer assumptions, right? So we want to ask the question, well, is that true, Mr. Developer? Is that really true? And what I did in this case is I actually used a fuzz test on the getShares function, and I actually found using fuzz testing that it contained a rounding down to 0 precision loss error for a mint amount that was greater than 0. So what that meant was that an attacker can actually exploit this. They can pass a value to getShares or to this mint function where mint amount is greater than 0. That will result in the precision loss rounding down to 0. So getShares will return 0 even though the mint amount is greater than 0, and even though total supply is greater than 0. And therefore, they can get 1-to-1 shares instead of, say, getting 1 to 0.5 shares, right? So this is, an example of vulnerability where we can challenge the developer assumptions, which may not be true because the developer hasn't thought about certain inputs
Can
that
you
could be
explain
passed
that
in. That
again, bro? The
yeah,
vulnerability?
yeah. So the developer is assuming that get shares will only return 0 if total supply is 0. So you can imagine that when the contract is started, total supply might be 0. So the idea is that the first person who mints, they're going to get 1-to-1 shares to kind of initialize the protocol. Because when it starts, there might not be any total supply. Are you following? Have I explained that correctly?
Yeah, the only question that I have is regarding what shares mean, some sort of,
Yeah, just think of shares as a
equivalence.
sort. Yeah, think of them as sort of an accounting unit of sorts, right?
Okay,
Where when you mint a certain amount of tokens, you get a certain amount of shares, and the shares actually represent sort of your true value, if you will.
and the problem there is that the user can pass the parameters as, so he can say mint amount equals 1 and still have 0 shares.
Well, so what they can do, they can pass an amount to get shares that will cause get shares to return 0, even if total supply isn't 0,
I understand.
right? So imagine that um, setup of this. Imagine that when you go to call mint, imagine that you'd be, for say you pass mint amount 100, imagine that you'd get 50 shares. So it'd be 1 to 0.5, for example. So for every 1 unit of mint amount, you'd get 0.5 shares based on the configuration of the system. But an attacker can pass a value here that would result in get shares returning 0, even though total supply is 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, whatever it might be. Because
Interesting.
the amount that they pass triggers a rounding down to 0 precision loss. So, but the code assumes that get shares will only return 0 if total supply is 0. That's a false assumption.
Basically,
If I explain that
yeah, yeah,
adequately,
that's great. I mean, now we understand it. Just
yeah,
because
maybe
those
it's hard
those parts,
to.
no, those parts are really interesting. I like to go back on them because those are really interesting.
Yeah, so an attacker can exploit this to actually get 1-to-1 shares when they shouldn't get 1-to-1 shares. But here's another one. So here we've got a missing state check, right? So you hear Trust and other really good auditors, and they talk about viewing smart contracts as state machines, as finite state machines that just move from state to state. So here, it's in a lottery contract, and you've got fulfill random words, which gets called by Chainlink to provide the requested randomness. And okay, we check that request ID, which is the sort of the bet lottery ticket. We check that it exists. That's great. But then we just set it to fulfilled. That's true, and then we just go on to process it and whether it's a winner or not. So what's missing here is actually a check that hasn't been fulfilled already.
Very nice.
Right. So now this is kind of it can be hard to find because now you're looking for something that's missing. So you're looking for what should be there that isn't there, and that can be even harder to find. Now, in the real world, this might not be such a big problem because the chance of getting a Chainlink calling you through with the same request ID multiple times is probably very low.
Yeah, but isn't that the
But
check
it's
on
still
the request ID there? Request ID dot exists.
so that checks that the ticket exists, but it's not checking that it's been fulfilled already.
I
Right, so
understand.
what this would mean is that if this gets called with the same request ID, a ticket that has already been paid out can just be paid out over and over again.
But these will be only allowed to be called by the Chainlink. Uh,
That's
uh,
right, yeah. So it's a low probability of it happening, but
Still a failure.
it's still a failure. But this pattern, you can look for this anywhere, right? So you can look for this anywhere where You want to think of the contract as a state machine, and when you're in a certain state, you want to ask the question, well, a state came before this state, and has that been validated? That's true or not? And you want to find missing or unchecked state transitions that you can exploit. So here's another thing that you can do is you can logging in the contract code to output state. So I think some people, they think, oh, I don't want to change the code. I don't want to touch the code. But yeah, no, you should feel free to edit the code and put logging in there to output state. You should feel free to build your own tests or modify existing ones and step through the execution with debug output to see how the state and the memory values are changed. And what you want to do when you read the test is you want to check whether adversarial tests actually exist, right? So in many cases, the project's automated tests, they only check the basic successful pass. So what you can do is you can build your own tests that check the attack pass, right? You can try all sorts of crazy inputs and you can build that into the tests, and you may find some vulnerabilities, you may not. But that in itself is a benefit to the project, particularly if you're doing, a private audit or a firm audit, because you can provide those tests to the project at the end as another benefit, another add-on to your service, right? Now, one thing that I look for as well is I'm looking for symmetry and asymmetry. What does that mean? So, for example, asymmetry would be like a mint and a burn or a buy and a sell. So typically, those functions should be performing actions that are opposing each other, right? And I'm looking for inconsistencies that might occur, but I'm also looking for symmetry. So that's, for example, a place where there's a repay calculation that's in multiple places. I'm going to see an example of that, right? I'm looking for inconsistencies. When I see symmetry and asymmetry, I'm looking for inconsistencies, and I'm looking for ways that I can exploit what's going on. And this is all part of developing an attacker mindset, right? So to develop an attacker mindset, you have to learn how to ask attacker questions. So you want to say, what if I call this function with an address that I control? Is the input address being properly validated? What if I call this function with an empty list? What if I call it with a really big number? What if I call it with a really small number, like one way? What if this function that takes multiple addresses, what if I call it with all identical addresses? Like, you want to think with an attacker mindset, because many developers, they actually don't think with an attacker mindset, particularly if they're in a rush to ship the code. So here's another example. This is an example of symmetry, right? So here we've got this function. It's a flash loan function where someone can request a flash loan with an amount, and get shares. It's this accounting thing. Just think of it as an accounting thing based on the amount. There's a certain number of shares, and the flash loan contract will transfer that amount of shares to the flash loan requester, and then it calls the onFlashLoan method. And then after that, it wants to transfer the shares back. But have a look here. You can see get shares has been calculated twice. Right? So it's calculated before the amount gets sent, and then it's calculated after when it's time to repay the amount. So straight away, you want to ask an attacker question, which is in this case, well, me as the attacker, once I take the flash loan, can I do anything to make the second calculation be calculated lower than the first one so that I can steal shares from this contract by repaying less shares than I borrowed? Does that make sense?
Yes, and it's really interesting, how that relates to symmetry. I guess that's because we're changing the number again and again, right?
Well, because we're calculating it twice. So the symmetry is that we're calculating get shares twice, both before and after the flash loan. So the idea is once we have the flash loan, can we do anything to make that
Nice.
second calculation be a lower number?
Really
And
interesting.
in this case, the answer was yes, we can. So effectively, what we could do is we could steal shares from the flash loan contract. Now, and again, developing the attacker mindset, can I skip loops, right? So here's a function verify and send. So it's given an array of signatures to verify, and so it iterates over them and verifies them, and then it sends some money. Well, what if you pass an empty list, right? Well, you just skip the loop and just go straight to the funds transfer.
Wow.
And these are all like this. I didn't find this one. This is from another order. It's on my exploiting developer assumptions deep dive. But these are all, every example that I'm giving you here is literally from an audit or from a live contract where it got exploited. Right? So these are all real examples. None of these are made up. Some of them they are simplified though, where I've just simplified them down. But
I think Slither would catch that, right?
pardon?
I think Slither would catch that, right? It would give
I'm not sure.
you
Yeah, I personally haven't used Slither, so I'm not sure.
awesome.
Now here again, going back to the attacker mindset. So again, can I exploit unchecked return values, right? So here we've got this function, commit collateral. So this is some sort of lending and borrowing system. There's a loan, and someone can call the commit collateral, with a loan ID and the token and the amount. So the idea here is that you can add more collateral to your loan, right, to stop you from being liquidated, for example. Right? Sounds good, right? Well, this collateral addresses. Collateral addresses is a set, and the add function actually returns a boolean. So it returns true or false. And a set has the property that every value in the set has to be unique. So if you try to add something to the set that already exists, then you can't, because it won't add, because that would be a duplicate, right? So address set.add, it will actually return false if you try to add something that already exists. But here, that return value is just not being checked at all. And typically that's because this is unusual behavior in Solidity. So most people in Solidity, they expect reverts. So the developer was probably expecting add to revert if the token was already there, but add returns false if the token's already there. So how can we exploit this? Well, if you're the borrower, what you can do is you can call commit collateral with your token and a zero amount, right? And because add will fail, so it'll fail silently, and then it'll just override the amount with zero.
Crazy.
Math handling. So this is something that I just want to touch on briefly with math handling. So typically when I started auditing and I saw like a lot of math and I saw a lot of equations, my eyes would just like glaze over it and I would just kind of just scroll past it. I wouldn't really put any effort into it. Now what I'm doing with math handling is I'm still not at the point where I'm like fully verifying all the math and verifying that it's all correct, and I'm not at that point yet. But what I have done is I've got this technique where I'm looking for certain precision loss in the math. So what I want to do is first of all, I want to expand the source of a variable into its full equation. So what you'll find is that there might be a variable that gets passed around and it has different operations performed to it. And what I will trace through the system and I'll find out everything that's going on and I'll just write it out into a full equation. And I can do this on paper usually. I think Delirious mentioned that he does something like this on paper as well. Papers generally works a bit better. And once I've got that full equation, then I'm going to look to see if I can simplify the equation, right? So I'm looking to see if I can remove unnecessary operations, if there's division before multiplication, if I can reorder things around to prevent that. And I'm looking just to simplify that full equation into the simplest form that I can. And then I'm using this fuzz testing technique that I've developed, where the idea is that we want to use fuzz testing to, first of all, to see if there's precision loss between the original version and the simplified version, but especially to see if there's some inputs that will result in a rounding to zero. So that's where the original is equal to zero, but the simplified, where we fixed a few things up, is greater than zero. And that's very valuable because those are usually more severe precision loss errors that can usually be exploited in some way. And you probably should go read this article. It's quite in depth and it sort of has all the code and it steps you through it to really learn this technique if you're interested in this. And then if I've identified that there is one of these precision losses between the original version of the equation and a simplified version, then I'm looking to apply that. I'm looking to weaponize that to cause damage. So that might be to mint free tokens, to repay a loan for free by repaying it in smaller increments that result in a round down to zero, or to show that somehow damage is caused to the protocol. That, for example, no collateral gets sold, that users receive, significantly more or fewer tokens than they should. But typically, precision loss by itself, it's not going to get you a high or a medium in audit contests anymore. It's going to be a low. So if you want to get a high or a medium in an audit contest, then you're going to have to weaponize the precision loss and use it to do some damage in the protocol. And another thing that I try and do now is I'm trying to submit proof of concepts in all my audit contests. Why is that? Well, one thing that I found is that submissions with proof of concept, they're much more likely to be accepted, and they're much less likely to be falsely marked as a duplicate or to be just outright rejected by the sponsor or the judge, even though the reason for rejection is not correct. And I think especially if you're not a big name in the field, and I'm not a big name at all, if you are a big name, quite often you can just submit the finding, no POC, and they'll just kind of go with it because you have that name power. But if you're starting out, you don't have that name power, then submitting a POC is provides for a much stronger finding. It increases the chance of your submission being chosen for the final report to the sponsor as well, right? And that's going to give you an increased payout, and it's also going to give you greater prominence in the report. So another thing to think about is, some people, they complain about the audit contest that it's not fair, that the big names, they get all these highs and mediums, and it's just not fair on us little guys. But the thing to understand is that the big names, they were all little guys at some point, right? They were all just like you or me. And so you can become a big name as well by getting your submission on that final report over and over again. And so what you want to do is you want to try and do POCs for as many of your submissions as possible. And you want to treat your contest submissions as part of the resume that you're building in Web3. If you want to do private audits, or if you want to work at a firm in the future, this is the best resume that you can have, is just a bunch of mediums and highs with great written submissions with proof of concepts in audit contests. And I do know that there are some tier one firms that are very big on proof of concepts, and that's what they want to produce, and that's what they want to see. So it can be really valuable for you to write proof of concepts, and also writing proof of concepts, it also really validates the finding. If you just write up the finding, hey, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, maybe it'll work. But if you have a POC that someone can just take and run and show the state, how the state's changed, and show that the funds have gone missing or whatever happened, then it's a really more concrete, and it really verifies that what you've actually found is legitimate.
One question for you though there
Yeah.
is, how do you usually go about building the POC? Do you use Foundry? Because a huge challenge is usually setting up the state. For some contracts and projects it's easier, but there's a lot of times you have a lot of setting up. You just use whatever the
Yeah.
developers had before. So you're gonna be using Hard Hat if they're using Hard Hat, Foundry if they use Foundry, or you have some sort of template to approach it.
Yeah, so if there are tests in the project, then I'll use their tests. And what I will do is I will hunt around their tests for the closest possible example to what I need. And also I'll find, a setup where it does sort of uses that functionality that I'm exploiting. And then I'll just copy that test into a new function, rename it, and then I'll just modify that to implement the POC. Now, if there's no tests, which is the case sometimes, then I will just roll my own. And I've recently done that in an audit as well, where I rolled my own test from scratch. And in that one, I used some comments in the code to set up the initial state based on the comments that the developers had made in the code about what the values should be, and so on and so
Nice.
forth. And in that case, I used Foundry. So my preferred tool is Foundry, especially because I like fuzz testing, and I think Foundry is just much cleaner and quicker to work with. But if the test already has hard hat tests, then I'm just going to find the closest one to what I need to do and just modify it as little as possible, try to use as much of their setup as possible. And the reason why I do that is because it makes it harder for them to reject the finding. One of the risks is if you have to roll your own setup from scratch, is that you're going to roll the setup incorrectly, and then they're going to point to that and say, your setup was wrong. So it's easier if you can just use their setup and just modify their test as little as possible.
Awesome.
And here I've just got another tip as well that came to mind, and that's, this is the tip to slide into someone's DMs. So, we're actually very privileged in our space, and that's because the space is still relatively small. There's probably, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in the world, maybe, who are in this sort of very niche field of Web3 smart contract auditing. So it's still actually a very, very small world. And in terms of the real like elite people, there's, I don't know, maybe like 50 of them, 100 of them, like the real top tier, the LSRs. How many of them are there? Not very many, right? And we have the power of the internet. So this is the amazing thing, is that you can actually like, ask these people questions. It'd be like, for example, if you could just like ask Michael Jordan a question about your basketball, about your shots, or ask Shaquille O'Neal, or ask Scottie Pippen, or whatever sport you follow, right? It's an amazing thing. Like most people, they don't have this ability because the space they're in is so big. But in our space, yeah, you can DM, you know, very very like high profile people who are almost like living gods in our space. And if you DM them correctly, they'll actually answer your question. Right? So that's an amazing thing. It's a very powerful thing to take advantage of.
I
What
can
you don't want to
confirm.
do is
Mm,
yeah. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to send a message like, hey, do you want to chat? Do you want to connect with me? Or even like, hey, can I ask you some questions? I'd say like these people that generally they're very, very busy. And so what I would just say is that you just want to ask the question, and you want to ask a direct question that shows that you've put in some work, right? You've put in some work and you've got stuck, and you just need a little bit of their help just to progress to the next step. That's what you want to do. And I'll give you an example. So this is a DM that I sent to basically, someone who's like living God. Like everyone, if I said his name, everyone would know his name. This guy is like a living legend. And this is my question about precision loss. I was doing some research and I wanted to wrap my mind around it. And you can see this question. It shows I've put in some serious work, and I just want to check, if the conclusion I've come to is correct. And boom, he just answers it. I had to wait 2 days. He answered it, and it was amazing. This is like Michael Jordan answering my question. This is like Shaquille O'Neal, answering my question. Right? It's an amazing thing. So just take advantage of it and be very thankful for it. And this is just some closing thoughts that I had. That remember, have that growth mindset. If someone else found a vulnerability, then you can find it too. Right? You can find it too. All you need is you need to learn the knowledge that they know, all those building blocks of domain knowledge. You can learn them too, because there was a point when that person who you think is a god, he didn't know any of this stuff. She didn't know any of this stuff. They didn't know any of this stuff. They all learn it all, and you can learn it all too. Right? You just have to put in the time and the effort, and you have to learn how they think, their thought patterns, the questions they're asking that enables them to find these vulnerabilities. You've got to learn the attacker mindset, right? And another point as well is that you want to give yourself permission to make mistakes and learn from them, right? Remember that we're all imperfect beings. We're all hopefully constantly growing, constantly improving. So you want to give yourself permission to make mistakes. You don't want to beat yourself up because you missed a finding, or you did poorly in that contest, or whatever it might be. You want to just view this as part of, a growing experience, that you're just improving and getting better and better. And you want to also give others permission to make mistakes as well, and especially if those mistakes negatively impact you, So if you lost contest rewards due to, judging that you disagreed with, well, that's life. But remember, those people, they're all imperfect people as well, and they're all on their own journey. They're all growing and trying to improve, and that's just life, But you want to try and be kind to others, try to be helpful, and try to be a blessing to others. And most of
so
all, you want to
nice.
believe in yourself. You want to believe in yourself, right? That you can do this. You can do this. You can become the next living legend, right? You can become the next, Spearbeer LSR, or whatever your goal is. You can become the next, private audit, kingpin. Whatever your goal is, you can achieve it, because the person who achieved it already, he was just like you at one point. She was just like you at one point. They were just like you at one point. They didn't know anything. Their knowledge was zero, and they got from zero to hero. And so can you. You can get from zero to hero. It's just a matter of time, energy, and effort, and just desire. How much do you want it, and what are you willing to do to get it? And so that's it. If you have any questions, yeah, you can feel free to bring them on.
Wow. I mean, that was an amazing, amazing presentation. By the way, amazing input at the end here about believing in yourself and striving for it. Thank you so much for doing that for us, brother. I do have one question for you. How do you usually approach
Sure.
large code bases? Because that's such a frustration for me to open, some contest and see 15 smart contracts. You have any kind of hack? You just go really fast through the files. You try to set up and understand everything before.
Yeah, so what I would say for me, just because for me, my time is very limited, so I tend to restrict the contests that I do or the projects that I audit to be under around 1500 to 2000 lines of code. So I'm not taking on anything that's like 10,000 lines or more. But what I do for those ones that say they're like 1500, 2000 lines of code, that still can be, 15 to 20 contracts, depending on how they're spread out, is I'll start with the building blocks. So I'll start with the tokens first, and then I'll sort of work my way up. And it depends on how much time I've allocated. So recently I did an audit where I had 2 days allocated, and I didn't get through all of the code because it would have been, not possible. And I started off reading the tokens and spent all 2 days just in the tokens and then in classes that in 2 or 3 classes that were related to the tokens. And I found, 4 different attacks and ended up finding 2 pretty decent issues. And I was happy with that. Again, did I review the entire project? No, I didn't have time for that. But I was very happy with, the findings that I did have, and it was a great learning experience. So I would say, you know, you have to figure out how much time you have, and you've got to choose the projects for the time that you have to spend. And then you want to start with the building blocks and work up from the building blocks to the rest of the system and try and understand then how the entire system fits together.
Really nice input. Input. Thank you, brother. Chris, you have a question?
Yes. First off, hello. Thanks for the great talk. It was very good, very insightful. And also, how do you deal with your personal health while like doing this thing? Do you like go work out? Do you like run? What do you do?
Sure. Yep. So I guess for me, in my real world business, I do have a business where I do have a physical job, sort of thing. So my real world business does keep me physically active in that sense. Now, I would say that I do stretches though, so I find that I like to stretch in the mornings, and that helps me with my real world job as well. So I like to stretch, and then I do my real world job, which keeps me physically fit and active. If I didn't have that real world job, if I was doing auditing full time, then yeah, I would have to add a physical component to do a bit of exercise, do some weights, probably set up a home gym, add some running in to my stretches to have that physical balance as well. I definitely wouldn't want to be purely on a chair and not getting a lot of exercise. I think our bodies have been designed to move, not necessarily to stand still all the time.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Nice.
Again, very good talk.
I don't know how to say your name, but go on. Question, please.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored. Like, Dacian, like, you'll be my like your articles like helped me a lot. I was even reading your article this early morning when I woke up, like about I don't know, I've forgotten, but like I was reading your article this morning, and they actually helped me when I was growing. So I have a few questions though. Like I have like 4 or 5 questions, and the one question is like based on um gas. Like there is a proposal based on EIP 150 based on gas usage and something has to do with 1/64 rule. And is mainly like it was mainly used in like this optimism stuff that Obron's Trust and Alarios they did the bounty on, and only top guys were able to perform well because the whole concept of that proposal is hard to understand. So like I don't know if you have any article or if you there is a way you can like we can learn about those EIP 150 and all those cross-layer stuff that's with gas breaking and all. And my second question is based on Immunify. Like, do you have any plans to do Immunify? And if you are going to do Immunify, what will be your setup be like? Then my third question would be like, I want to know your real world business, like what you do real life and how you handle your time, because you have a child and you have a business. But I think I have excess time. I'm a student, but I still find it hard to like focus because it's hard to just look at a computer screen for so long sometimes. So like I don't know how you do it. Like you stay like motivated 247 to keep on doing it, and when you have a spare time, you still do it. Then I want to like ask like your top finding and like what the inspiration around your top finding. So that's like 4 questions. Thank you very much. If you don't remember any question, you can ask me and I'll ask you again. Thank you, sir.
All right, that's a lot of questions. Well, yeah, thank you so much for the warm thoughts that you shared about my content. Yeah, I do have people messaging me, just saying like that that my content really helped them, and that's great. I love getting those messages. Thank you so much. And I would say the first question I would have to pass on that one. I think that's probably at the moment outside of my pay grade. I think there's so much that I still have yet to learn in the space. I've got so many ideas for deep dives that I want to do in the future as well. And so I'll have to leave that one for now. The second question, was that the one about how I balance my life, or what was the second question?
How you balance your life with your work and your real life business, everything.
Yeah. So I won't identify exactly what I do for my real life business. That's because I'm still kind of, semi-anon sort of thing. So I'll keep it that way for the time being. But I will say that I do have a trade business. So I live in Australia, and trade businesses in Australia, they can be very, very profitable, very good businesses to have. There's a lot of tax advantages to having a trade business, and you can kind of, get paid to exercise, get paid really well to exercise, and it's generally a very good business. So that's what I have. And so the way that I sort of structure that is typically I work in my trade business from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30, 3:30 p.m. And I'm able to make between $100 and $200 an hour, which is pretty awesome. And then when I get home, I typically have a shower because I'll be sweaty, and then I'll have something to eat, and then I'll typically do my smart contract auditing or my research or whatever I do in the evenings. So say from 4 to 8, 5 to 9, 6 to 10 p.m., something like that, and then I go to sleep, and then I do it all over again. Sometimes what I'm able to do is, because I usually work 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, but sometimes I'll take a day or two off, so I'm not working in my trade business at all, and then I'm just doing my auditing all day, or especially when I'm researching to produce another deep dive, then I get to do it all day, and that's great as well. Now, I think the next question was about Immunify. So I personally haven't done Immunify. I have received 2 bug bounties, but they were both directly from the project. And so what I did is I went on DeFi Llama. I heard this really good tip from listening to another interview where someone said, look, instead of going to Immunify, you can just go on DeFi Llama and just find a project that was launched like a year or 2 ago and just audit their code. And that's exactly what I did, and that's exactly how I found my $28,000 bug bounty. And that's what I've done, basically. I haven't done Immunify just yet. I think for me, I get the most value from, first of all, from researching, using Solid, reading the past audit reports, researching specific vulnerability classes, and then taking that knowledge and applying it in audit contests. That's probably where I get the most benefit, because my main concern is to get knowledge, is to get better and better and better. It's not so much the financial aspect, because I know the financial rewards will come once I get up to that top tier space in terms of having all the knowledge in place and then being able to weaponize that knowledge. And I think, have I answered all your questions now? Or
No, is remaining one about your best finding and your thought process towards it, how you found it.
my best finding, I would have to say that my 2 best findings are things that I found last week in those 2 days that I had. I'd been overseas, holidaying overseas for all of June, and I got back to Australia, and I had like 2 days before starting work again in the real world, and I spent those 2 days doing an audit, and yeah, my two best findings are those two, which unfortunately I can't share at the moment. And we'll see what the judges think. Maybe the judges think that my findings were crap, but that's okay. I know that the two things that I found last week, I could have never found a month ago or 2 months ago. So that really encouraged me. It was really, really encouraging to know that I've leveled up once again and that I'm still growing, still improving, and I've still got so much more to improve ahead of me as well.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I have one more. Like Sherlock or Code Arena, which one do you like prefer more? Sherlock or Code Arena? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's been a little bit debated on Twitter recently. I will say that probably for me, Sherlock has been the most benefit for me personally, and that is because the turnaround time is a lot quicker. So that enables me to participate in a contest and then see the results much quicker. And so it closes that feedback loop, which helps me to improve faster. Code Arena tends to have a much longer feedback loop, especially for me. I don't have backstage, so I can't see what's going on backstage at all. And so that tends to make progress slower. But I do participate in both, and I just try to pick projects where I can apply what I've learned to try and weaponize that knowledge to internalize it. So I participate in both, depending on which one has the best projects for the knowledge that I'm trying to acquire at the moment.
Those were really
Thank you so
nice
much.
questions. Thank you so much, brother, for the questions. Really nice. And I gotta say, Code for Arena all the way. They are the best. I have one question here from Chalk. Do you think CK-based smart contracts will be the next thing in Web3 security?
Again, I have to confess my ignorance on that point. I have absolutely no idea.
Awesome, brother. Dacian, my friend, I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for this amazing presentation. We learned a lot, and a lot of people will learn from this. You have any final message to give us?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy. I think someone asked as well, like, how do you balance like work and life, and how do you do it all and stuff? And I think one thing that really helps me as well is that I really love this. Like, I love researching, I love learning, and I love reading code and trying to think of ways to break it. And so I think like if you really enjoy this field, then it's not really going to be like work for you. It's going to be like fun. It's going to be kind of like a hobby, and it's a much better hobby than watching TV shows or watching movies or even playing computer games. I think so. Just try and make it fun. Try and make the whole learning experience fun, and try and have a good time and really enjoy what you do. And I think you'll find that you'll progress a lot quicker that way as well, and you'll have more desire and more motivation to put the work in, to put the time in, and you'll find those reserves of energy to keep going. When the going gets tough.
Amazing, bro. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Bye bye, guys. Everybody
Thank you so much.
follow our friend Dacian. I'm going to drop his Twitter on the general chat and talk to you guys later.